Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. It is October 17th, 2024. The time now is 1:10 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm a little bit under the weather. Woke up with a cold. Change of seasons. It's kind of hit me overnight. But everything is all good. So yesterday we left off talking about the Skinner box and the Tavistock Institute. Excuse me. So the Tavistock Institute has been accused of being involved in a lot of this mind control programs. So in this chapter, they get into the human relations and how they present themselves to the public in a different way. Excuse me. Sorry, guys. So let's just get into it. So the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations, known by insiders as the quote-unquote FREUD HILTON, that's funny, has been a major nexus for the worldwide psychological manipulation that has taken place over the last 50 years. The Tavistock story, at least the public version of it, begins immediately after World War II, when members of the British military intelligence created the Institute. In its own literature, Tavistock is described as an organization of dynamic psychiatry, which was intended to practice what they term, quote unquote, societry. And this was societry on the planet as a whole. And what I term as the world mind control. British military intelligence itself, in the persons of many of its chief players, has been aimed at a one world government since its inception. British service or secret service directors, on an almost one-to-one basis, have been advocates of the Fabian socialism. Everyone wonders, and let me stop here. So everyone is wondering why, excuse me, why we're seeing the direction of the West going towards socialism and communism is because that was the plan from the beginning. Socialism and communism was not created by poor folk or the commoner. Okay. It was funded, directed, and instituted in many parts around the world by the elitist. Believe it that many of the elitist or the ruling class, the higher ups, not the ones that, do not come from old money. Old money does not believe in competition. Old money does not believe in free markets. And that's something we need to understand about this. The common man did not come up with the system. It's a ruling class system. It is meant to keep the masses at the bottom part, or the 99% at the lower levels, serving the 1%. That is socialism. That is communism. Keep the peasants at bay. So It is alleged that the Tavistock Institute was set up much earlier than its announced inception, which is over 20 years prior to 1921, and this was by Major John Rawlings Rees on the orders of the Round Table's Royal Institute of International Affairs, also known as the Chatham House. The RIIA, along with the American Council on Foreign Relations, had been founded in 1919 during the Versailles Peace Conference, both being early New World Order executive arms. Rees was the man who dreamed of the quote unquote building a society in which it is possible for any member of any social group to be treated psychiatrically. And this would be without resort to legal means. And even if they do not desire such treatment. At the end of World War II, Rees called for the creation of the psychological shock troops, who would fan out from the Tavistock Institute to engineer the future direction of society. In 1932, Tavistock was put under the dictatorship of the German psychologist Kurt Lewin. Lewin was the founder of the National Training Laboratories and director of the Harvard Psychological Clinic. An odd qualification for a psychiatrist, I think. Now, one of the key players in the original creation of the OSS in America was Lewin. Lewin is credited with much of the original Tavistock research into mass brainwashing, applying the results of repeated trauma, torture, and mind control to a society at large. If terror can be induced on a widespread basis into a society, Lewin stated, then a society reverts to a tabula rasa, which is a blank state, and is a situation where control can easily be instituted from an exterior point. Putting it another way, by the creation of controlled chaos, the populations or the populace can be brought to the point where it is willing or willingly to submit to the greater control. Lewin maintained that society must be driven into a state of equivalent to an quote unquote early childhood situation. Now, let me pause right here. That's exactly what we're seeing today. What they spoke about over 100 years ago, which was their intention, is to put the population back to a childish state or back to a childhood situation. This is why you have grown people acting like little tyrant children or brats. That's why you have 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds. You see them every day on social media. You see them every day on mainstream media. That's why you have these individuals with the mindset of a brat of 11 years or 10 years or 5 years old. This is exactly what they were talking about 100 years ago. So they've accomplished it. So he continues, he termed this societal chaos as fluidity. I wonder where that term came from. Fluidity, right? You see it in some communities. The Tavistock focus in the early days was on a strategic warfare study, in particular of Germany. And this was with the emphasis on the re-education of the errant New World Order colony. During World War II, many of the Institute's members, including the founder Rees, ran the British Psychological Warfare Directorate and the subsidiary part of the organizations that were based in the United States. After World War II, Tavistock can functionally be considered to have become a part of Britain's Psychological Warfare Bureau, now working on projects dealing with the brainwashing of populations. Tavistock is governed by what it calls an invisible college, echoing the antique occultist terminology and reminding one that the British intelligence was founded by the Freemasons and remains deeply Masonic to this day. The original use of the term, quote unquote, the invisible college, prior to the announcement of the creation of Tavistock, was Reese's reference to an informal association that he had created of all the psychiatrists then working for the British military. For funding, the Tavistock Institute relies on large grants from anonymous benefactors, which is no doubt a substantial portion coming directly from the Crown, again, the royals. They also receive grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Carnegie Institute, and the World Health Organization, and the British Home Office. Tavistock is also interlinked worldwide with a vast network of other organizations and think tanks. This includes UNESCO, the WHO, the World Federation for Mental Health, and the RAND Corporation. Excuse me. Tavistock is simply a front group for the psychological imposition of the New World Order upon the planet, and its main philosophic tool is the Hegelian dialectic, which is framed in the terms of Lewin. The Rockefellers have always been prominent in deciding the course of Tavistock. According to the official chronicler of the group, the Rockefeller Foundation, before making us a grant, would need to be satisfied not only by our policies, but also with the persons to carry them out, end quote. In a Tavistock-funded profile of the group, it is stated that the role of the Institute has been A, the invention of the command psychiatrist as a medical social role, which is carrying out the reconnaissance in a large structure and a defined group, and they are leading to the ascertainment and recognition of critical problems in the sphere of human relations and management. B, excuse me, guys. Sorry, I had to sneeze. Whew. That was a powerful sneeze there. So B, uh, their purpose again, the invention of social psychiatry as a possible science permitting preventative technical intervention in large-scale problems. C, the fashioning of a whole series of military institutions which concretely and effectively implemented the policies advocated. D, the invention of new types of therapeutic communities. E, the invention of cultural psychiatry and the capability nurtured in Tavistock. So Tavistock uses psychiatrists to work with the lay person or personnel, in this case the military, and they work in collaborative partnerships. In other words, the strategy of the command psychiatry and the developments to which it led were psychodynamically conceived and based. Tavistock was born from the collaboration of the international moneyed elite, the military intelligence, and the materialistic psychiatric community, which refers to itself as the quote unquote military. So its self admitted military orientation as Operation Phoenix, again being a Masonic symbol that it shares with the infamous Vietnam War assassination program. One is reminded of the Freemasonic legend, the Ordo ab Chaos, which is order out of chaos, which could just as easily describe the the Tavistock method of destroying a targeted subject or a targeted population, and this is prior to the reprogramming. The Tavistock modus operandi is, again, targeting the population. Throughout the Tavistock literature, either official or unofficial, Tavistock inspired, they reiterate their global vision and make it clear that the Institute is intended to work its long term, quote unquote, society on the world regardless of the wishes of the individuals who inhabit it. One of the most successful of Tavistock's offshoot organizations is what was originally known as the National Training Laboratories, the NTL. It is now known as NTL Institute for the Applied Behavioral Sciences, which was founded in 1947. This place is located in Bethel, Maine, and the mission of the NTL is to give Lewin inspired group dynamics sessions to American leaders. Again, during the group session, dissonance or stress is introduced to destroy the individual's previous beliefs. And then a new group, which is oriented or has an oriented personality, is coaxed forth. This is the primary technical method used by the myriad of Tavistock influence sensitivity groups like Al-Anon and Esalen. Since the 1950s, the NTL has processed the majority of America's corporate leaders in its programs, while simultaneously running the same programs for various segments of the government, including the Navy, the Department of Education, and the State Department. Let me stop right here. This makes sense. This is why we have the crazy people running education, our agencies, and in our political representation. Continuing, none dare to call it mind control. Eric Trist, the chairman of Tavistock's governors, in 1963 described his and Tavistock's work as mass brainwashing, delineating into a detail in his theory of quote unquote social turbulence, which is based upon the theories of Hegel. Although again, Trist is far more quick to cite Lewin. Trist postulated that the administering of a series of traumatizing shocks upon the society would destabilize it. Does that sound familiar? What's happening right now with the illegal immigration? It's not spontaneous. It's by design to destabilize our culture and the nation. Because remember, the elites want a global order. In order for them to get this global order, they have to destabilize each country and then rebuild it again. And this is what's happening right now to us, to the West, actually to every country. Because at the same time, they've already destabilized the third world first. And now they're destabilizing the second and the first world. So they can bring, so they can have a unified lower level class, right? There's the haves and the haves nots. And actually, the haves are just 1% of the world's population. This is what's happening to us. So Trist postulated that the administering of a series of traumatizing shocks upon a society would destabilize it. This would be lowering the overall character of a society's reasoning. Trist suggested that by late 1963, the world had moved into a condition, quote, of permanent social turbulence. That, again, the 60s were civil rights movement, the hippie movement, and this is when the turbulence, which was orchestrated and run by the ruling class, okay, orchestrated and run by the ruling class. This is what they called permanent social turbulence. Because after the 60s, supposedly, we've been constantly in chaos. We've been constantly moving, moving, moving. Society hasn't had a chance of rest. So permanent social turbulence that would serve to usher in a new condition of society, a new paradigm, and a new possibility for remaking the face of the planet. The nature of the permanent social turbulence that Trist foresaw is further defined in a book published in 1975 by one of Trist's associates, Fred Emery. The book Futures We Are In likens the condition of the current day society to the violent punk welfare state of Anthony Burgess' novel, A Clockwork Orange. And that is so true. This was written in the 1960s. Emery, in Reflection of Trist, also trumpets Hegel. He describes the first stage of the breakdown of society as being superficiality, in which previous societal values are questioned and discarded. He uses as an example of this death the Judeo Christian paradigm. The next inevitable state is, quote, the segmentation, in which societal institutions break down, resulting in the reversion to paranoid groups of individuals who are hostile to each other. Oh my God, this is playing out exactly what they said 100 years ago or, 50 years ago in this book. Excuse me, 50 years ago in the philosophy, 100 years ago in the philosophy. It's happening step by step. We're watching this play out every single day. It's so crazy. So they wanted paranoid groups of individuals hostile to each other. The next stage would be to break down the society or breakdown of society that would launch a fascist movement akin to the Nazis. And the final step or the final part of the plan would be the final and most disrupted state of society is termed the disassociation, in which the individuals become the entirety of the society for himself and is isolated from other members of the group. The dominant culture of the society becomes fantasy and superstition, according to Trist. The current wired society, where the main interaction of the individual is with electronic media, is only a metaphor for disassociation. The cyberpunks, the New Agers, the couch potatoes take note. It is interesting to note that the same progression can be seen in the microcosm with the induction of the multiple personality, an oft asserted goal of the intelligence agency, brain banging. In May of 1967, at Queen Elizabeth Palatial Estate in Duval, France, a conference was convened. It was intended to update participants on an ongoing project of the Tavistock network. This was the conference of the Transatlantic Technological Imbalance and Collaboration, which was sponsored by the Scientific and Technological Committee of the North Atlantic Assembly and the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Among the projects mentioned at this conference were the collaboration of Emery and Trist on quote unquote the social disturbance and the SRI Tavistock Images of a Man. Again, Images of a Man project. The participants in the conference included Tavistock Harlan Cleveland, Willis Harman of Tavistock Offshoot Stanford Research Institute, the SRI, and we've talked a lot about that. Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, which is the Future of Carter National Security Advisor, and the Trilateral Commission, excuse me, the founding executive director. Then you had Fred Emery, who had earlier delineated the stages of societal disintegration in his Futures We Are In, and other participants were Dr. Aurelio Pizei, later to head the Zero Growth Fixated Club of Rome, then the chairman of the Economic Committee of the Atlantic Institute, an important NATO think tank, and Sir Alexander King and Sir Solly Zuckerman, which was the advisor of the British Crown, fleshing out the hologram of the elitist New World Order planning is the information that Brzezinski is believed by many in the Western intelligence community or organizations to be a KGB mole. He was recruited by the British Table and the Rothschild Walberg agent William Yandell Elliott. Henry Kissinger is also linked to this group, and reportedly after being recruited to a KGB queer blackmail ring, which was focused on EICOM G2 headquarters in Germany at the end of the Second World War. Kissinger was a member of the U.S. Army 970th Counterintelligence Corps. And they were involved in creating the Nazi rat lines that enabled many prominent Nazis to escape prosecution at the end of World War II. Kissinger's reported mentor was Fritz Kramer of the Pentagon Plans Division, who also groomed Alexander Haig. Kramer's secret life during World War II, according to the deceased conspiracy researcher Mae Brussel, was that of a special lieutenant to Hitler. What does it matter whose side you are on? The controllers might say. Both sides in the war, or for that matter, the Cold War, only served to foster the synthesis of the New World Order. The principles that were agreed upon at the Tavistock Conference will sound very familiar to those who have been following the reshaping of human institutions and the values by the New World Order. These include the belief that man should not dominate nature, but instead become part of it, with no more rights and privileges than, say, the purple-assed bamboo in wild. Governments are obsolete and will be replaced by other more encompassing institutions. Mankind is moving into a deindustrialization or deindustrialized post-technological society and information age. And this would be the age of Aquarius. Again, Aborigines with laptop computers. That's what they want. They want to take us back to tribalism. So the primary impetus towards the evolution of the post-technological society are the repeated shocks and chaos that are taking place, including such events as the Kennedy assassination, the Vietnam War, and the assault on traditional institutions, and thinking by the psychedelic counterculture. This philosophy was described exactly by Dr. William Sargent of the Tavistock Institute in 1957. In his book, The Battle for the Mind, which was a physiology of conversion and the brainwashing. Again, the idea is that the micro reflects the macro. This is the occultist dictum, as above, so below. This is what Sargent said. Quote, various types of beliefs can be implemented or implanted in many people after the brain function has been sufficiently disturbed by accidentally or deliberately induced fear, anger, and excitement. Of the results caused by such disturbances, the most common one is temporarily impaired judgment and heightened suggestibility. Its various group manifestations are sometimes classed under the head of herd instinct and appear most spectacularly in wartime, during severe epidemics, and in all similar periods of common danger, which increases anxiety, and so the individual and the mass so the individual and mass suggestibility. Out of the Tavistock Conference also came Zbigniew Brzezinski in his 1968 book, The Technotronic Age, that posits an information society whose basis of competition is replaced by quote unquote amusement focus, which is based on spectator spectacles, like I guess the gladiator Colosseum, if we're talking about ancient times. Mass sports and TV providing an opiate for increasingly purposeless masses. New forms of social control may be needed to limit the indiscriminate exercise by the individual of their new powers. The possibility of extensive chemical mind control will call for a social definition of the common criteria of restraint as well as utilization. And some think that Guy Debord's Society of Spectacle isn't a literal thing. In the technotronic age, the quote unquote nation state has a fundamental unit of man's organized life, as seized to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concept of the nation state. This is what Brzezinski stated. At the same time, the capacity to assert social and political control over the individual will vastly increase. Let me stop here. That's happening. It's been happening for the last 30 years. We've seen the dramatic change since September 11th, basically. It will soon be possible to assert almost continuous control over every single citizen and to maintain up-to-date files on every single citizen, containing even the most personal details about health, personal behavior, and in addition, the more customary data. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval. The cloud, basically, is what he's saying. Google, Facebook, basic all social media, and whatever programs I've been talking about in the last week. Think about this. These files will be the subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. Power will gravitate into the hands of those who control the information. Our existing institutions will be supplanted by pre-crisis management institutions, the task of which will be to identify in advance likely social crisis and to develop programs to cope with them. This will encourage tendencies through the next several decades towards the technotronic era, which is a dictatorship, leaving even less room for political procedures as we know them today. Finally, looking ahead to the end of the century, the possibility of biochemical mind control and genetic tinkering with man. Let me stop here. That's already being accomplished. CRISPR-Cas9, mRNAs, RNAs. We're in the process right now of them completely altering the man or mankind through transhumanism. So biochemical mind control and genetic tinkering of man, including beings which will function like men and reason like men as well. Probably talking about AI and robotics. This could give rise to some difficult questions. A book written at the same time by conference chairman Aurelio Pesce was titled The Chasm Ahead, and it too echoed the prevailing elitist themes. He reiterated that a one-world government was the only solution to the problems of the world. Also required was that Russia and the United States would have to enter into a partnership in the global planning and enforcement, which is a theme that has become increasingly obvious in the recent years, with the Spetsnaz setting up shop in Peoria and Tulsa, and Clinton trying to lease the Long Beach naval yards to mainland China. One of the foot soldiers of the Tavistock, currently fallen from grace, at least in the eyes of the American people, is, believe it or not, Newt Gingrich. The truth about the Newt The truth about new exists much in contradiction to the image as a staunch upholder of Republican ideals and conservative values. Gingrich is, in fact, another Trojan horse whose mentor is the futurist Alvin Toffler. Toffler's book, The Third Wave, describes the current technocratic takeover of the world. And this is the acquisition of virtually all wealth by a tiny elite and the relegation of the vast majority of the populace to the world foraging in the garbage heaps of the rich. So again, the small, less than 1% elite want us all, and I've been saying this for years, and people didn't understand what I was saying. They want everyone else like the third world. They want the United States like the third world. They want Canada like the third world. They want all of Europe like the third world. We're easier to manage when we're trying to survive. And then, of course, we've talked about the inclusion of the population reduction, which it's been 100 and something year plan. It's probably longer than that, but they put it into effect hardcore in the late 1800s. And it's a racial plan, believe it or not. And white folks, for you white folks out there, you're not part of their whiteness. Okay, this is not a white skin thing. It's a bloodline thing. Okay, because a lot of people are stuck on the culture white against black and black against brown and all that. This has nothing to do with that. This has to do with your DNA. They believe they're not like us. It doesn't matter if you're white. It doesn't matter if you look white. You're not the same as them. And when we're talking about racial, it's really about the bloodlines. It goes back to the ancients, if you want to, the Nephilim and all this. This is what they're talking about. Excuse me. So they want the rest of the populace, the 99%, to go back to the third world foraging in the garbage heaps of the rich. According to Gingrich, speaking to a crowd of yuppies at a congress in the quote unquote democracy virtual America in the mid to late 60s, I read Drucker's The Age of Discontinuities, Boulding's The Meaning of the 20th Century, Bell's Beyond Post-Industrial Society, all of which were precursors to the first popularizer of this notion, which was For Future Shock, which was written basically a quarter of a century ago. Now, those 4 books described everything we're leaving. Hold on, guys. I swear, man, when I'm trying to give you some like real juicy stuff, some person always has to like interrupt. It's crazy stuff. All right, so where was I? So we're talking about New. Okay, New Gingrich was talking about all the books that he read. And then now those 4 books described everything we're living through for all practical purposes. And nothing has changed for a quarter of a century. I've worked with Tofflers for 20 years in trying to figure out this interesting question. Since this is all intellectually obvious, why can't we break through? Toffler is a protege of Kenneth Boulding, who is one of Tavistock's leading lights in the United States, and according to his wife, founded the Revolutionary Students for Democratic Society, the SDS. Boulding and his wife were responsible for much bridge building between the Fabians, societrists of the Tavistock, and the new leftists in 1960s. Gingrich revealed his not so hidden roots when he mentioned the anticipatory democracy. And this is the Anticipatory Democracy Project in his introduction to the Third Wave AD, as it is termed. This was a project fielded by the Tavistock in the 1960s and intended to bring about a new age shift toward anything but traditional values, unless it was Wellesian open conspiracy traditional values. And this was obviously the elite controllers' values. Among the later projects that would be created by participants in the AD project would be the Malthusian Club of Rome and the Carter administration's Global Plan 2000 or Global 2000 Plan. Gingrich was ushered into the Tavistock orbit in 1965 when, as an undergrad at Emory University, a professor at Georgia Tech introduced him to the work of Boulding and Toffler. After getting his PhD at Tulane, Gingrich took a teaching job at West Georgia State College, which was outside of Atlanta. This is the East Coast node of the humanist psychology movement. One of Gingrich's closest associates was anything but Republican Jimmy Carter, who put New in charge of an AD pilot project, which called the Goals for Georgia. It was only later that Gingrich got his calling as a banner waver of the new right. Excuse me. All right, so I'll leave it here, and then tomorrow we'll get into, let's see here, what they call the shock troops and the British National Association for Mental Health. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, hit notification for future live streams and videos. If you want to support monetarily, you can support me at the links in the description. Again, what I'm talking about in the last few days is exactly what's taking place in our society and in our nation. So I just want everyone to understand not to engage in the culture war, because that's just to keep you in a loop. If you really want to fight the beast, and if you really want to understand what's going on, you have to pay attention to what really matters. And that's that this has been in play and a plan since the late 1800s. It is a racial plan, and I'm not, again, white people, you're included in that. You're included in the determination, elimination, okay? You're not exempt from this. This is a bloodline plan for world domination and control, and it's a eugenics philosophy between the elite families and the rest of us. So if you're dicking around with the culture war, stop. Instead of, talking about the over the surface bullshit that they want you to talk about, you got to dig in deep and expose the people to the reality of what the agenda is. That is 20 layers deep, not just the obvious. They tell you who to get mad at, and you get mad at those people or that group. You need to step back and look at the mosaic or the big picture. The easy target is usually not the real target. Remember that. All right, guys. I'll be back with some more of this real raw information. Stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.